Hello my lovelies, welcome to my new video. This time we're talking about Tolkien's published works. I'll give a short overview of the plot and my suggestion on which books to read in what order. Enjoy. Hello my lovelies and welcome to the Clueless Fangirl YouTube channel. I create content like this, lore videos, live streams and podcasts on Lord of the Ring, or rather Tolkien's works, on a weekly basis. If you want to follow me on social media, all links are in the description of this video. Enjoy! So, this is a question I often hear when talking about Tolkien and his published work. I mean, obviously, most people know the 3 books on the Lord of the Rings, as well as The Hobbit. Some even might know the Silmarillion, but then it gets, well, let's say dark. So I wanted to do an overview of what to read in what order. All this obviously is only a suggestion by me. If you want to start with, let's say, the unfinished tales, go for it. I wish you good fortunes in the wars to come, so to speak. So I want to start in the order the books were published. I'm not going too deep into the context. I try at least. In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit. On a blank paper he found in a school certificate, Tolkien started what later became one of the most known and loved children's fantasy novel till this day, The Hobbit, There and Back Again. It was Tolkien's first published book, and I don't think I have to tell you people a lot on the content and plot of that book. It was published in 1937, and a later edited version was then published. It was kind of redone so it would fit within the later published Lord of the Ring book series. And I might have said it before, it is a well-known and loved children's fantasy novel, but it's definitely not just for children. Out of all the published works, this is probably the easiest read as well as one of the shorter ones. After The Hobbit followed the 3-book series The Lord of the Rings in 1945 and 1955. I mean, what to say about the books? If you only know the movies and are here to find if there is anything besides them, go for the 3 books. Yes, they are written and published almost 70 years ago. And yes, fantasy literature today might use another language, have another pacing, has another writing style, etc. But just like the movies are still classics almost 20 years later, the books definitely are as well. And Lord of the Ring is not about the usage of what seems now an antiquated language. It's about the world Tolkien introduces us to, a world full of magic and wonders and mythical beings of good versus evil, love and hate. Everything is in there, and at least for me, these stories never get old. Out of all the books, I think this should be your base knowledge, as a lot here is repeated that happened before, or at least is hinted at. And it's not hard to read. It's a finished book, or rather 3 in themselves, and not just fragments like other texts and stories he started. In 1972, Tolkien published a pretty unknown book, The Adventure of Tom Bombadil, and other verses from the Red Book. Let me be honest, if you're not a super hardcore fan, I think you can neglect this story. And although I do love the character of Tom Bombadil, and even till today we have no clear answer on who he really is, it's not on my must-read list. Let me just say one thing about the Red Book. This is the Red Book of Westmarch. It basically is a collection of stories, writings and books where the main protagonists like Bilbo and Frodo talk about the events and adventures they went through. It contains the Hobbit tales, Bilbo's journey, the downfall of Sauron, Frodo's journey, Bilbo's translation from Elvish lore, so basically the Silmarillion. Those were all the books Tolkien published in his lifetime, but definitely not all there is. In 1977, his son Christopher published the Silmarillion 4 years after his father's death in 1973. Originally, after the great success of The Hobbit, Tolkien's publisher asked if there was more, and Tolkien sent him an early draft of the Silmarillion. Just a short info on that. Stories from the Silmarillion he wrote as early as 1917. Some of them are, let's say, almost finished. Some are really just fragments of what he must have had in mind for that character or the story itself. The Silmarillion can be divided in 5 parts. The first one being the Ainulindalë, basically the creation myth of Ada, followed by the Valaquenta, a description of the spirit and godlike beings of this new world, the Maya and the Vala, which in their powers and appearances, I'd say, are very similar to Roman and Greek gods. But then you also have the monotheistic god Eru, who created the earth. You might have heard or guessed when reading Tolkien, he was a religious man, if that is even the right word. Let's say he was Christian. Still, he mixed polytheistic and monotheistic themes in his work. A third section is the Cuenta Silmarillion, which is the main story of the Silmarillion. It's basically the story of Ada before and until the First Age. I made a 3-part series on the First Age, so I won't go too deep into this topic. If you're interested, link is somewhere here, maybe. The Cuenta Silmarillion is followed by the Ankhalabeth, basically the history of the downfall of Númenor and the events of the Second Age of Ada. Again, a video on that, as that will be the plot for the Amazon series, will follow, I promise. The last part of the Silmarillion is about the Third Age, the age we know from the movies and the Lord of the Ring books. It's called Of the Rings of Power in the Third Age. This is obviously not as detailed as the Lord of the Ring books. It's just around 20 pages or so. Each of the 5 parts were originally meant to be separate books, and as I said before, some are not finished by Tolkien himself. So to be able to publish his father's work, Christopher Tolkien used old writings, letters and notes mostly to fill in the gaps and the missing links. And this is why some people do not count the Silmarillion as canon. I'm not amongst these. I feel Christopher, who has been very close to his father and was kind of an advisor to him, finished the stories in his late father's sense. In 1980, Christopher published the Unfinished Tales, and as the name might give away, it's a collection of incomplete stories followed by Christopher's notes and comments to point out where this fits in, but also inconsistencies with other existing materials. So overall, this is a great addition, but it's not canon and it's partly highly confusing, as Tolkien, for example, was a fan of changing character names a lot. But there are some really informative parts and stories which are somewhat missing in the published works. For example, the origins of the Istari and Gandalf, or the death of Isildur and how he actually lost the ring. From 1983 till 1996, Tolkien's son published a 12-volume book series, The History of Middle-earth. It shouldn't be misinterpreted as the real chronological history as we know it. It's more Tolkien's own journey within his stories and the world he created. Originally, Tolkien wanted to create a mythology for England as compared to other countries. He apparently thought his country was missing parts of these stories and great tales. The 12 books are extremely detailed and often give 3 or more different versions of a story or even one character. One of the most interesting ones is the evolution of Galadriel from a basically non-existing character to a major playing in the Lord of the Ring books. So let's give you an overview of what the series contains. The first 5 books are related to the stories and characters of the Silmarillion. They are in order: the Book of Lost Tales 1, the Book of Lost Tales 2, the Lays of Beleriand, the Shaping of Middle-earth, the Lost Road and other writings. The next 4 books, books 6 to 9, are mostly about the events of the Lord of the Ring books, as well as partly the downfall of Númenor. They are The Return of the Shadow, The Treason of Isengard, The War of the Ring, and Sauron Defeated. Book 10 and 11 are Morgoth's Ring and The War of the Jewels. There are also plots from the Silmarillion, but those parts he worked on after publishing The Lord of the Ring. So this is basically post-editing and revising existing materials as well as answering open questions, I would say. I think I mentioned in a video before that one of my favorite stories from the Legendarium is actually in Morgoth's Ring. It's the dialogue of a mortar woman, Andreth, and the elven king Finrod about immortality. Arabeth, Finrod e Andreth. For me, the topic of immortality and mortality is one of the main tragedies and causes of destruction in Tolkien's world. I'm just saying downfall of Númenor, or maybe besides the Oath of Fëanor, for example. Still important. And last but not least, the 96 published book 12 and last book of the series, The Peoples of Middle-earth. This mainly contains more information on the appendices of the Lord of the Ring books, as well as the development of the races and languages in later writings. In 2007, to my surprise, one of my favorite stories from the Silmarillion and the First Age came out as, well, let's say a standalone book, The Children of Húrin, the first of the 3 great tales from the Silmarillion. It is way easier to read than the Silmarillion itself and gives so much depth to the tragic downfall of one of the great houses of men and a family itself. It is the story of Húrin and his only son Turin Turambar. Again, if you want to know more details on the plot, it is in my First Age video here on my channel. The book was followed by the second great tale of Beren and Luthien in 2017. Again, more plot details in my First Age video. But as you can guess, this is a very important plot even till the time of the Third Age, and a bit of a mirror, I would say, of the Aragorn and Arwen story in Lord of the Ring. The last of the 3 great tales was published in 2018, The Fall of Gondolin, my favorite place in Middle-earth ever. I did enjoy the plot, the writing and style. I must say I prefer Children of Húrin and Beren and Luthien, but this is partly due because Christopher Tolkien had to work again with unfinished works of his late father. He had to make basically a complete book from notes, unfinished text and ideas of his father. Due to the high age of Christopher Tolkien and some interviews I read he gave after publishing the last book in 2018, I do not expect another book to follow, unfortunately. But then again, Christopher said he wouldn't publish any more books after Children of Húrin in 2007, so let's see what the Tolkien estate has in mind. But I guess you'll be busy with reading now anyway till the Amazon series comes out whenever it comes out. So, what is my recommendation now for you what to read in what order? Before that, I want to point out this is completely my view, as I said in the beginning of this video, and it's totally up to you with what you want to start and if you want to read them in their published order or in any other order that works for you. I would actually start with the 3 Lord of the Ring books, The Fellowship of the Ring, The Two Towers and The Return of the King. Why? And why not with The Hobbit, as most people will probably tell you? I do not think that The Hobbit is anywhere near the Lord of the Ring books, not in style, not in tension, not in character development or world building or anything. Yes, everything I just mentioned is in there, but on a whole other level. Also, I feel The Hobbit that was written and published before Lord of the Ring was then adapted in a way to fit the later uber successful book series of the Lord of the Ring books. And therefore for me it's a nice addition, but I would never start with the addition. I'd always start with the main work. Then I'd go for The Hobbit. And because I said it's basically a very nice to have addition to the main book, And it's not too time consuming, as well as an easy read. And before you go to the other main book for me, the Silmarillion. The Silmarillion would be next on my list. And to be fair, it's actually my favorite work of Tolkien. It has everything I'm missing in Lord of the Ring. Deeper dive into battles, characters, especially the elves, are way more fleshed out and three-dimensional. There are elves, let's say evil elves, or let's say elves with bad intentions. A bit unimaginable in the Lord of the Ring books, I'd say. I also do think especially the first age part in the Silmarillion is very high fantasy, and that's what I enjoy most in this style of literature and what I'm looking for. I did say before, it's not an easy read, and especially all the names and family trees are so confusing. You either have to read it 200 times to fully understand it, or put 200 family trees next to your book, or watch my upcoming video on family trees. So, after finishing the Silmarillion, I would go for the three great tales in the order they were published: Children of Húrin, Beren and Luthien, The Fall of Gondolin. All three books can be seen as standalone books, although I'd say they are not, and that's actually why I would suggest to read the base and the foundation first, the Silmarillion, and then go for the detailed stories in the Great Tales. I guess you could do it the other way around and start with the Great Tales and then go for the Silmarillion, but that would be like building the windows and the doors first and then building the fundament of the house. Well, up to you. After the three Great Tales, it is hard to decide what to advise you. I personally did read the unfinished tales after the Silmarillion, and I don't think that is what I would advise. The unfinished tales is not long, it's not really complicated to understand, and it basically fills the gaps and answers questions. I had a lot of them after reading everything I mentioned before, and one of my favorite storylines has always been Rohan and the Rohirrim, and I was very happy to find a bit of a backstory on Rohan's history there in the unfinished tales. So after the unfinished tales, well, there's still this massive collection of the history of Middle-earth. I must admit, parts of the 12-part book series I literally just read once, and I have actually the 3-book limited edition. It is way more handy, so if you want to buy the original, the books itself and not an audiobook or ebook, I would go for the 3-part limited edition. It's really way more handy. And well, the story itself, I mean, some are amazing and kind of round up and complete your Tolkien experience. Well, if that actually ever is really possible for Tolkien nerds like us. And as mentioned, it contains characters and stories that don't exist in other books and give you a deeper understanding and possibly answer some of your open questions. And last but not least, The Adventure of Tom Bombadil and other verses from the Red Book. Oh well, read it if you want to. I'd say it's not that important, but there are so many people out there that can't get enough of Tolkien, so if you're interested, go for it. So, that was my short but not short overview on Tolkien's published works. Concerning Middle-earth or Arda, I have to say, obviously in his lifetime he published other books, letters and more, but we're not here for that, I guess. I hope you enjoyed this video. I always do enjoy talking Tolkien. Thanks for listening, and bye bye my lovelies.